All right. Well, again, welcome everybody. Welcome to the AERO conference. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Really super excited to introduce my next guest, our next speaker, someone who I've been following for a really long time, and whose work I absolutely value. You'll hear a lot about that in just a minute. But Adam is, I would say, he's a youth ally, and he works with young people, and he's done lots of different things, which he can tell you a little bit more about. But he's led nonprofits. He's even worked with some government agencies, and he supports youth in everything he does as a consultant, a writer. Has done a lot with youth voice and democracy, and his latest book is Democracy Deficit Disorder: Learning Democracy with Young People, and it was published by Peter Lang Group. So without further ado, Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Peter. Really quick, remind me the hard stop time, Peter.
So we are scheduled to stop this at, let me just make sure. So we're going to stop at 6 p.m.
Sweet. Okay. All right. So hello and welcome, everybody. And thank you so much. Peter, big thanks to you for having me. I really appreciate your longtime support and our interactions and all the cool stuff between you and I. I am a huge fan of AERO. Back in the late 90s, all the times keep getting longer. Back in the late 90s, I was a youth worker who was aspiring to connect with other youth workers on this thing called the internet. And at that point, there weren't very many resources out there. There weren't very many organizations. AERO was one of the first organizations that I bumped into that expanded my imagination. So it's quite an honor to be here. All of the work that's gone on before by Jerry and everybody who's been affiliated with AERO. So much respect and great gratitude, and thanks for having me. I have a lot of places to start in this conversation, but before I get going, I just want to tell you all that I'm not here today as an academic. I'm not here today as some kind of a go for it, hope for the best, and make it all work out with big thinking. Instead, I'm here as this is my life's work. I started working with young people as I say a frontline youth worker when I was just 14 years old. I taught in a theater program that worked with low-income people in a Midwestern city where I grew up. I spent the first 10 years of my life as a homeless kid in a homeless family. My father had severe post-traumatic stress disorder, and we grew up in the backseat of a car and in motels across the United States and Canada. I'm from Alberta. And when we got to the States, our car broke down 3 times in the same city, and that's where I ended up growing up for the next 10 years. And in that time, I found my calling, not as some beneficent thing from on high, but more like a solar 2x4 upside the head that said, this is the way to go. And it came in the form of a man named Idu Mahuli. Idu was 6'4", had these beautiful long dreadlocks. And when he walked through the neighborhood, it was like watching Sesame Street enacted. All the kids came running up to him. All the kids knew him. It's because he'd been running this theater program for several summers in a row for free for the neighborhood kids. He came to the housing projects throughout our city in the low-income neighborhoods, and he did this theater program to get kids on the stage who wouldn't normally have an opportunity. I had done a mime show in junior high, and they wouldn't let me back in to do the next acting thing because they wanted to use it as a stick and a carrot to make me do better with my grades. That didn't resonate with me. It didn't play. But this guy, Edu, came to me and he said, Adam, this summer I want you to help us teach. I said, teach what? He said, teach drama. I said, I don't know anything about drama. He said, oh, you're 14 years old. You know all about drama. I said, well, I don't know anything about teaching. He said, come with me, watch me for a few weeks, and then if you want to, you can lead a class. Well, I was audacious enough to think that that was a good idea. Plus, I liked the idea of getting some money to spend. So I took the job. And I just ended up spending 3 summers working with Edu Mahili to teach drama in his program called You're the Star. He was working with a man at a nearby university. This guy's name was Augusto Boal. Boal went on to get all kinds of acclaim for his program called Theater of the Oppressed. But Edu developed this program with Augusto Boal at the University of Nebraska at Omaha in the 1980s. And so my teacher was a teacher with teachers, and it was a pretty impressive thing to me once I found that out 10 years later. But in the meantime, I just knew at the end of those 3 summers that I wanted to spend the rest of my life trying to be like he do. I am a whopping 5 feet 9 inches tall, and so I've accepted that I'm never going to be as tall as he do. He's 6'4", but next summer I'm going to grow out my dreadlocks and see how that goes. That could be really, really cool. So watch out. Lots has happened since then, though. Those are the summers of my youth, and a few decades have passed now, and now I've spent all this time. Peter alluded to a little bit of it. I started this thing called the Free Child Project in 2001. There was a terrorist attack on New York City in September of that year, and I knew that young people were doing stuff already that fought that narrative of destruction and chaos and mayhem and violence. I knew it because I was one of them when I was young. I knew it because I had worked with these young people as a youth worker. I knew it because I just knew it was in the water in the communities that I had come from, whether they were low-income communities or communities of color or non-American communities. It didn't make sense to me that young people would be involved in that chaos. So I started this Free Child Project for youth and social change, but it was after 10 years of line level youth work. I had done 3 terms of AmeriCorps, working with Kurdish and Iraqi refugee kids in Nebraska, working with 9 northern New Mexican pueblos to teach them about service learning and project-based learning, working with the Corporation for National Service to help them provide service learning expertise to states that wouldn't have it otherwise. I had done youth jobs in drug treatment centers, court-ordered drug treatment center for youth, in a Planned Parenthood program to teach young people adult living skills, in the YWCA, in the YMCA, in all of these places that I could find. I didn't just want to babysit kids. I didn't just want to be a teacher. I didn't have an idea of how those things happened anyway, but I wanted to do cool stuff to change the lives of young people. I didn't know a name for it. Nobody in my family graduated from college before. It took me 8 years to get through. When I finally did, I got a job with this thing called the Points of Light Foundation. It was George Bush Sr.'s old volunteer promotion thing, the 1,000 points of light. He had a whole youth involvement piece. And in this youth involvement work, my job was to be a youth ambassador for a year. I traveled across the United States and I met all kinds of nonprofits, local and national, that taught about youth involvement. And I decided I wanted to be on that side of the conversation. I wanted to be in that, drink that water. I brought them all kinds of examples, this Points of Light Foundation. I said, look at all this stuff that young people are doing to change the world. These are Black kids and brown kids and poor kids and dropouts and runaways. And then I found out about something called unschooling, and I found out about homeschooling and deschooling. And I found out about all of this critical consciousness and this kind of awareness building. I brought that all back to this Point to Light Foundation. I said, look at everything I found. It looks different from what you sent me to. Because what they sent me to were organizations with the word youth in their title. Organizations that were talking about positive youth development and service learning and youth action. Organizations that looked just like me, a white male who talks loud and maybe is a little bit charismatic here and there. But I didn't want that. And I knew that's not what the world needed then. I knew that what the world needed were the young people that I had supported all of my career. I knew that what the world had needed was me when I was 11 years old, not me when I was an old adult. I knew that what the world had needed were brown kids and Black kids and non-English speakers and low-income kids and homeless kids and foster kids and kids of incarcerated parents and young people of all ilk to step in the front of organizations, to step in the front of movements. The way that Dr. King had brought young people to Birmingham, the way that young people had stepped off the buses and led the sit-ins in Greensboro, the way that young people had been standing at the towers flagging down the Americans when the British ships came during the Revolutionary War. Oh yeah, they were 12 and 13. It turns out that there was this long history of young people fighting for positive, powerful potential in this country and all around the world. I brought all that back to Points of Light Foundation, and they said, oh, that's nice, but that's not what we talk about, Adam. What we talk about are these things. And it always looked like this guy, except maybe dressed a little nicer, maybe with a little bit more hair. It was kind of gross, and I didn't care for it. I didn't like it. So I went out and started the Free Child Project for Youth and Social Change in 2001, working with a group of friends from across the country, from all this work that I'd done, from all this travel and the moving that I'd done. I connected the dots with them. I said, hey, tell me about the examples of the coolest things that you know. And they told me, they showed me. I got a chance to visit a few. I traveled some cities and I saw some things. And I went back to the places where I had worked, where I had started things. I started to piece it all together. freechild.org, more than 1,000 examples of young people changing the world in positive, powerful ways. 20 years later, I'm still at it. Now we call it the Free Child Institute for Youth Engagement. We've partnered with 500 organizations across the United States, nonprofit agencies, government agencies. We've helped them build programs and transform their traditional top-down way that they looked at youth and made it into something more holistic, more true, more authentic. But that wasn't all. Somewhere along the way, I worked for Washington State's Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, the state education agency here in Washington. I was their first ever student engagement specialist. I had my guns drawn. I was doing my master's in educational leadership and policy studies at the University of Washington. And I knew that the way to affect change was get into the system and work with it. So I started teaching teachers about student engagement. I started giving speeches about student voice. And I developed an idea that I call meaningful student involvement, all of this stuff, published books, wrote research, did the journal articles, the whole 9 yards. Spent 5 years on that project. And it was a spectacular run. I developed another website called soundout.org, all focused on student voice in schools. So now I have this two-prong approach, freechild.org, all on youth and communities, soundout.org, all on student voice in schools. But the big message was missing, the thing that tied it all together. I'm not a spectacular learner. I'm an autodidact. I love to teach myself stuff. But I'm not a spectacular learner. I'm not one of those great minds that can memorize big stuff. I like words, though. And I love systems. I love to put together the way that systems work. And then it happened. You all know, January 6th, right? And we could describe that however we want to. But I'm just going to go ahead and put it out there that there was something wrong that day. Really, really wrong. I worked with a friend of mine, Cynthia McDermott. Cynthia was the director of the Masters in Teaching program at Antioch, LA. She published a whole bunch of books all about youth power and student engagement or student empowerment and all kinds of great work. And Cynthia and I started talking about this January 6th and everything that it had devolved because of it and ahead of it. But the message kept coming through my brain hole. This notion of young people fighting what this was that was happening. Cynthia and I ended up putting together a book. You know the books. Oh, this book's a pain in the neck. It's the most academic thing I've ever written. So if you've seen any of my other books, I've written a few dozen others. This is probably my best stab at doing something in the line of academic literature. And it's called Democracy Deficit Disorder, Learning Democracy with Young People. It's just coming out right now from Peter Lang. And it's exciting because I finally made the single most important argument that I've ever put together. And in today's presentation, I'm going to walk through it. I'm going to tell you about this democracy deficit disorder. Let's begin by actually looking at what that means, what that intention is of that statement. Before we do, though, before we really go into it, a couple housekeeping notes. I want to invite you all over to the chat. If you're on a computer, jump into the chat for the Zoom and just drop a hello into there for me and let me know that you're out there if you're so inclined. For the rest of us, I would, and for everybody, get a piece of paper and a pen. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can just be a scrap on the back of something or whatever. Just take some notes for yourself. I'm gonna talk you through a couple of activities. And the first one is this. I want you to write the word democracy on your paper. And all that I want you to do on your own, take 90 seconds and write your own definition. What is democracy? There's no wrong answer here. Just give it a peel. What is democracy? Define democracy. Big hello to Angela Cross and Gabriel. I appreciate you all jumping on there. I'm putting our little assignment here into the chat. Define democracy just for yourself. There's no wrong answer. It could be long, it can be short. There's no wrong way to do it. All right. What I'd love for anybody to do, and everybody who's on a computer, type your definition right there into the chat. Give me some words. And do I have a brave soul who wants to unmute themselves and share their definition out loud? Anybody at all? All right, I'm going to read Rachel's. Oh, Rachel says she doesn't know. Okay, thanks. Hi, Rachel. Somebody drop a definition. There we go. Brave soul.
Freedom, work, effort, respect, patience.
Freedom, work, effort, respect, and patience. What's your name again?
Angela.
Thank you, Angela. I appreciate that. Samantha writes into the chat, democracy is participating in the decisions of a community and having a voice and a say. Kathy Ann writes, statistical computation of group desire. Woo! How about other folks? There's no wrong answer. Just jump in here. You can unmute yourself and speak it out loud, or you can drop it in the chat. Deb Tights, I'm not American, but I like government buy-in for the people. Mari writes, democracy is when every person has equal voice and ability to make informed choices. Gabriel writes, deciding together. Michael Mazur writes, personal agency. These are awesome. All of them are great. Roberts says, vetted choices as inclusive. Thank you, Robert Swanson. Vetted choices as inclusive. None of these answers are wrong. They're great. One of the realities that I got to find out about democracy is that everybody defines it differently. And we always have. We define it according to our circumstance, to our worldview, all of these different things. And I think that's one of the awesome things about democracy is that we literally can't define it wrong. You define it according to your own perspective. When it comes to a government, though, I think it becomes a tricky thing to be unclear about what democracy means. Because for some people, democracy might entail revolution, might entail, these big high-minded concepts of overthrowing things and yada, yada. But the will of the people seems to be that central kind of piece that floats down the middle of all these definitions of democracy. To understand how that fits together in this picture, we have to look at the other side of it, I think. We have to understand that in order for there to be a democracy, there's always going to be some amount of disorder because of the fluid nature of democracy, because of the ways it changes. Bauman wrote about fluidity, and democracy is one of the most fluid notions that we can have. And because of that, we have to understand that when democracy is failing, it shows up in really specific ways. So for this book, my co-author and I, we looked at the democracy deficit disorder, which is when the thinking, feelings, and actions of an individual, a community, a country, or the globe are dropping, they're failing. When the thinking, feelings, and actions of the individuals, community, country, and globe are failing, when they're coming apart. That's inclusive of all of these definitions that we've shared. It's inclusive of personal agency. It's inclusive of deciding together. It's inclusive of equal voice and ability and informed choice and buy-in for the people and statistical competition of group desire. It's inclusive of participation and so forth and so on. It's inclusive of all these definitions. When our thinking, feelings, and actions are dropping precipitously, we have a deficit disorder. To understand where that comes from, where it goes though, and why it's so important for young people, I think that we have to look into that lens and we have to understand why it's happening. Check this out. I think that the democracy deficit disorder is caused by a lot of different factors, but one of the root factors is called adultism. Adultism is simply bias towards adults. Adultism is a root cause of the democracy deficit disorder because it seeds from the youngest ages the disbelief, the ineffectiveness, and even the oppressiveness of democracy onto young people themselves of all ages, children, babies, infants, all the way through preteens and teenagers and young adults, all points in between. Adultism, bias towards adults. That means that we're favoring adults, results in discrimination against youth. Adultism results in ineffective social institutions. Adultism results in toxic shared cultures. Adultism results in unhealthy personal relationships. Our thinking, feelings, and actions towards democracy start dropping, start failing because of these results. We give up on democracy because these things are happening to us when we are young people. I'm going to assume that a lot, if not all of the people here today, we all identify as adults. Whether or not we want to is irrelevant. That's an assumption. If there's any under 18s, more power to you. If there's any under 21s, more power to you. But I'm going to make the assumption that we're all here from this perception that we can at least see that we were affected by adultism when we were young. There are so many ways that adultism becomes obvious. It becomes obvious in our thinking and the ways that we think in our minds, our mindsets. It becomes obvious in our feelings and emotions and the way that we feel and emote with the world around us. It becomes obvious in our culture, the ways that we talk to each other, the ideas that we express. It becomes obvious in our structures, in our government, in our schools, in our homes. Adultism is one of these driving factors that really results in so much. But the biggest detriment and the most specific outcome is that adultism causes the democracy deficit disorder. Adultism is a cause, as a specific outcome of adultism is poisonous parenting. Adultism is a direct outcome of adultism is the youth industrial complex. I'm going to explore some of this right now, just to dig in. Let's take a look. The youth industrial complex is this notion that young people are not actually people. And again, I mean all people not identified as adults. Anyone between birth, even pre-birth, all the way through 18, 21, 25, whatever the arbitrary number is, according to your circumstance where you're at. The youth industrial complex includes private resources, public resources, and youth activities that happen between governments, businesses, and nonprofits. It's an industrial complex because it makes money for the people who lead it, for the people who perpetuate it, and for the people who gain from it. Now, the gain is the question. Adam, what's wrong with the youth industrial complex if young people are winning because of it? Well, first thing, I question, what is winning in that circumstance? Are young people really winning? Or do they have a perception of winning something that they might not be? Are young people really winning, or do they know that the jig is up? Are young people really winning? Or do they actually know that they're not? The youth industrial complex is the direct result of the democracy deficit disorder. We've learned to see young people as such cynical commodities that we deny their potential as full humans. We ignore their possibilities for meaningful interactions with adults beyond what we want them to do. And we do it in all of our different institutions. In government agencies, including education, public health, recreation, governance itself as an activity, we see young people as a commodity. I speak as a government worker, as somebody who's worked with young people in government. Aside from the state education agency in Washington, I was also the school health manager for Washington State's Department of Health. I also worked with the Corporation for National Service as a service learning consultant. And young people are merely seen as commodity. I've sat in the meetings of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention where they've identified young people as statistical numerical realities, devoid of individual personalities, perspectives, and actions that make a difference, mano a mano. They're just more numbers. Businesses do the same. I operate a business. I'm leery to say this. It's challenging. But in reality, I'm benefiting from the condition of young people today. I provide this kind of support and more to these three different buckets: nonprofits, government agencies, and businesses, to help them understand what they're doing with young people. Oh, other businesses, I mean, come on, Nike. They have a sweet website where you can go and design your own tennis shoe and get it sent to you. Tennis shoe, basketball shoe, whatever. Guess who their primary consumer of that product is? Young people. Same thing with Reebok shoes. Same thing with Levi jeans. You can get customized Levi's. Sweet, only $125 a pair. Online. You design them yourself. Put the pockets where you want them. Put the rips, put the stain on them, whatever you want. That's the youth industrial complex. Oh, and nonprofit organizations. Of course, we all know, and I don't mean this cynically, I don't mean this conspiratorially, nonprofits don't exist to solve the problem. Well, what do they do, Adam? Well, the same thing that governments and businesses do. They pacify. They soothe young people. They calm them down. They let them know that everything's going to be okay. They oversimplify. They take away the rigidity. They take away the pain. They take away the suffering and make things just easy enough. They infantilize. You know. They promote docility, compliance, complicity, and perpetuation. We have all kinds of other words that we could put on here. You know, words like sustain, words like segregate. Let's not get too focused on it, though. We need to come back up. We need some fresh air. This democracy deficit disorder is hard, Adam. Well, let's remember what Hans Müller said. He was a Lutheran minister in Germany. Spent 8 years of his life in concentration camps. And before they murdered him, he said, first they came for the socialists and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me. I want to share these hard truths with you because you know you were young once. You know that you care about young people. That's why you are here. You know that young people are struggling right now. They need our support. And you know that they're going to come for you if you don't go to help. We all need to go to help. What does that look like, Adam? Well, this is the beginning of it. It looks like engaging in democracy on purpose. Now, there's different ways to engage in democracy. We can benefit from it. That's not really engaging too much. We can participate in it, but that might not be engaging too much. Attendance is not engagement, folks, but you probably already know that. We could drive democracy. Now, that's a thing. We can lead democracy, critically examine democracy. We can liberate democracy, and we can transform democracy. What I'd like everybody to do on your note paper again Whip that note paper back out. I want you to pick one of these words, just one. I would pick drive. And I want 3 bullet points underneath that word that tell me what that means. What does it mean to drive democracy? You could pick critical exam. What does it mean to critically examine democracy?
We can't see the paper.
It's okay. There's nothing on it. It's just my blank paper.
Okay.
Just pick your word off of the diagram, off of the graphic on the screen. Benefit, participate, engage, drive, lead, critically examine, liberate, or transform. And write 3 bullet points underneath it. 1 word for each bullet point that says, what does it mean to do this? You could do benefit. What does it mean to benefit from democracy? And then I'm going to ask for a shout out at the end and get some different thoughts. But take 90 seconds. I'll tell you when your time's up. 3 bullet points to describe one of the items on this spectrum. This is where I play the astoundingly motivating music and have a thumping rhythm. Bum, bum, bum. Don't worry, I'll make mouth noises instead. Bum, bum, bum. That's a problem when you like to hear yourself. It's a shame. Bum, 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 bum. And you think you're funny. That's the worst. Take 15 seconds and wrap up whatever you're writing. Ooh, Robert Swanson's ahead of everybody. And this is exactly what I want you folks to do. Jump onto the chat, type in what you wrote for yourself, or unmute yourself and just speak it out loud. Robert wrote to engage a platform operating process and vetting. Woo, dang. Kathy Ann wrote, participate is to reflect, listen, and decide. Somebody give me another one. You can unmute yourself and say it out loud or just drop it into the chat. Angela Cross wrote, engage, to communicate, listen, and be heard. Did anybody choose liberate, to liberate democracy? What does that mean? It's scary, maybe. What does it mean to transform democracy? Unmute yourself or drop it in the chat, please. To transform democracy is to take what exists now and make it into something new. That's not 3 words, though. I can cheat, though, right? What does it mean to benefit from democracy? Ooh, Deborah Rourke wrote, transform means participatory, inclusive, and devoted to care of the earth and the vulnerable. Thank you, Deb. Any other thoughts? What does it mean to lead democracy? Ooh, Mari wrote, liberate, make it available to all, remove barriers to form and function. No, Mari, you don't get your gold star. You only came up with 2. Okay, just joking. No gold stars. I'm an Alfie Cohen fan. All right, so here's the deal. There's no wrong way to do this either. You're going to find kind of a theme here if you're paying attention in the audience. There's no wrong way to do a lot of it. I mean, there are that whole beginning part. Ooh, that was heavy, man. Okay, I'm going to give some more boundaries and definitions as we go along. But these things where we define them on our own, this is democracy. It's more complicated. It's more sophisticated than any of that. But for the sake of this learning time together, let's take a look at this. You see, when we are thinking about democracy, we have to think of the whole young person. One of the things that I managed to do in the Democracy Deficit Disorder book was bring together a bunch of concepts that I've been piping out for decades now and begin to bring them into one space because I saw clearly what they were all about. One of the dilemmas of all of our work, it doesn't matter what form or function you are in. If you are a parent at home, if you're a teacher in a school, if you're a facilitator of young people's learning in an out-of-school time space, if you're a writer, a counselor, a preacher, a teacher, We negate seeing the whole young person consistently and perpetually. We take away their wholeness and we replace it with a piece of the pie. You know, that one piece of the pie that we can focus on. We might look at just the social factors. We might look at just the emotional factors. We might look at just the cultural factors or just the gender identity. But in reality, every young person, every kid, every baby, every young adult is a whole young person right now. They're not 50% people. They're not 90% people. They're not 43% people. They're not 78% people. Every young person is a 100% whole person right now. And if that feels a little bit radical to you, just a little tiny bit, welcome to humility, man. This is a hard thing for me to learn. I live with an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old who are constantly reminding me they are whole people right now. And sometimes my adultist self doesn't see or acknowledge that. My 19-year-old daughter reminds me all the time that she's a whole person right now. And instead of just asking her how college is going, I could check in about her whole world. What her home life is like, what her school life is like, what her friends' houses are like, what her work is like, her internet, her gaming, her texting, her neighborhood, her sports, her social media, her faith community, her volunteering, her physical life, her cognitive life, her emotion. I mean, you guys get it. Every young person arrives to our work, no matter what it is, as a whole person right now. If we are to combat the democracy deficit disorder, it's because we stop seeing young people as partial people. And we start seeing every young person as a whole person right now. In practice, this has a lot of different looks, but I want to speak specifically to the educational component now, in a minute. First, I want to talk about these beliefs. Now, I put a lot of words here. I'm sorry about that. I do not like PowerPoints with too many words. I'm not just going to read the lists either. But if you take a look at this, these are some beliefs behind holistic youth development. We use the word development here cautiously. I was trying to speak to the audience of youth workers who will hopefully read the democracy deficit disorder. Development, it's a skewed thing. It believes that people progress on a staircase kind of approach. It's predictable. Every step is the same distance. That's all wonky. And it's not just about young people. I don't know about you all, but at the tender age of 48, I'm still developing. I'm still changing. And we all are. Adults develop all of our lives. So this is about all people, but let's look at young people specifically. Holistic youth development believes that every person has inherent value. Incarcerated youth have inherent value. Low-income youth, inherent value. Transgender youth, inherent value. Non-English speakers, inherent value, inherent value, inherent value. Every person has inherent value. Quit giving up on people. Youth development's a fluid, dynamic process. These stair-step things that are so nice to look at, oh, we know what they're going to do next. Let's talk about the teenagers. Man, get out of here with that stuff. It's all dependent on your identity, your belonging, and the other factors in your life. And it changes per person all of the time. We are developing, we're evolving. Every individual is evolving throughout their life. Evolution does not happen on a one-way spectrum. Evolution happens in a spiral that's a chaotic mess. Sometimes we're up the spiral, sometimes we're down the spiral. Sometimes all the factors are going well, sometimes a couple of the factors are going well. And some days we have crappy days where no factor is working out well. It's challenging to practice this notion of holistic human development because of that, because of all of these things. But here's what it actually looks like. When we look at the whole wide world, holistic youth development looks like belonging for every young person. It looks like support from friends in the larger community. It looks like learning opportunities, not schools, man. Get out of here with that stuff. I'm talking about learning opportunities for every young person all the time. Not the ones that I want them to learn, but the ones that they want to learn. Not the ones that I've determined are important to get them ready for the future, but the ones that they want to learn, even when it sucks. I live with an 8-year-old who takes every egg out of the egg container and she holds a flashlight up to it. She candles every single egg in our house and it has been for a couple months because that's what she wants to learn. It's so hard for me to watch. Why is it so hard for me to watch? Because I'm an adultist. That's what we do. I'm working on it. I hope that she grants me some opportunity to mess up because I certainly do all the time. But look at this. Young people have access to resources of all sorts. She gets the flashlight that she needs to look at her eggs. She gets the eggs. Even if it doesn't make sense to me, because that's what she wants to learn. She gets opportunities to generate, contribute, and consolidate resources. Whew, that's a whole lot. Young people in this holistic youth development, they have safe, comfortable housing. They have full democracy engagement. That's not a capital D. That's not democratic. It's democracy. What does that mean, Adam? Let's keep looking. It changes when we get to the community level because our lives do not operate in one nutshell. We're all products of systems. We belong into and through systems. We are not subject to the system. We are perpetuators of the systems. We are creators, not consumers of systems. Unless we're not. But in holistic youth development, we understand that there's everyday care and help for every young person. There's personal safety. There's community relationships. We don't just live in our own bubble, but we are connected to the whole world around us. There's play and fun. There's democracy education. There's guidance and support, right responsibilities. Notice that does not say rights and responsibilities. That says right responsibilities according to who we are, where we are, when we are, what we are. There's understanding of our family background and there's full democracy engagement. Adam, there's that phrase again. Let's keep going. Because holistic youth development also happens on the individual level. It's our personal health. It's our democracy education that touches our head, our hearts, and our hands. It's our communication. It's our self-confidence. It's our personal and social responsibility. It's our self-independence. It's our family and friends. And there it is one more time. Full democracy engagement. Holistic youth development is a cornerstone for confronting the democracy deficit disorder. But so is this. Democracy education. Today, I'm going to talk to you about democracy education in two ways. First, I'm going to talk to you about it as meaningful student involvement. I'll explain that in just a moment. Second, I'm going to talk to you about democracy education as a natural phenomenon, which is different from meaningful student involvement. Instead, it's inherent and innate in every person, and it's part of our drive, our initiative as humans. It's part of being fully human, and it's part of every young person right now. But first, meaningful student involvement. Meaningful student involvement is the radical idea that all young people everywhere, all the time, can be part, must be part, and should be an equitable part of creating, driving, transmitting, facilitating, making decisions, and ultimately running all education everywhere. Now, this isn't some highfalutin, oh, wow, that sounds great in theory, but what does it mean in practice? I'm going to get to the real practice in just a second. But for now, let's look at these three spheres that form meaningful student involvement. Meaningful student involvement always has learning at the center, so envision that if you may. There is no student involvement that does not have learning as a goal that is meaningful. Anytime that a person is learning, anytime that a person is involved in education, a identifiable process for learning. Anytime that a person is involved in education, if they're not learning, they're not meaningful. This goes for after-school extracurricular programs. This goes for athletics and sports, but it also goes for trigonometry or whatever class it was that was too hard, too much, too obtuse, too ethereal, and didn't ever make sense to you. That wasn't meaningful. Even if it's stuck in your craw, even if you memorized everything the right way, it wasn't meaningful. What is meaningful is when students have actual roles that you can identify I'm sorry, what is meaningful is when the attitude, the culture, and the structure of schools in any of their forms reflect meaningfulness. They should be a mirror. What is meaningful is when young people of all ages are engaged in planning, research, teaching, evaluation, decision-making, and advocacy throughout the education system. What is meaningful is when young people are actively involved in public action to make education better. When young people are actively engaged, equitably engaged in classroom pedagogy, teaching, and learning. When young people are equitably engaged in the school environment beyond the classroom, beyond teaching. Schools become meaningful when young people are equitably involved in extracurricular activities and educational leadership and informal school improvement. All of these form the nucleus of meaningful student involvement, but there are some very practical steps that it informs. This practicality is built on these different locations for meaningful student involvement. You know these places and spaces because you are concerned about education. They might not be in your particular place where you work or volunteer, but they still exist. And I want you to think honestly and earnestly about each one of these where you are and whether or not students are meaningfully involved. Do they have a notion of what it is to be part of that community? Do they understand what education does within your learning community? Are they equitable partners in learning, in classrooms, in the principal's office, or headmaster, or leader, or whatever you call that individual, the executive director, the big kahuna? Are young people meaningfully involved in counseling, in the hallway, in the school boardroom? I'm talking about those directors, you know who we're talking about. In the media center, in administration areas, in the cafeteria, in the stairwells, the education protests, in the media. Are young people involved actively, meaningfully as equitable partners in the technology centers and committee meetings and district offices and bathrooms? Meaningful involvement in the bathroom? Say it ain't so, but it is. In the school rallies, in the legislatures, in the athletic fields, in the school auditoriums, in the social media for the school, in teacher colleges, in courts, all of the places that affect education. Not some of them, not one of them. I'm not talking about your Monday morning meeting where everybody gets together and tells you how their weekend was. I'm not talking about the teacher break room where the kids can come in and get a pop from the pop machine. I'm talking about young people as equitable partners. We're going to unpack what that means in just a moment. Now, I do want to say that this presentation, even at this length, is still going to be woefully short. I'm probably not going to get through it. Check it out online. I'll keep preaching and teaching in other spaces all the time. I'm on all the Facebook and the LinkedIn and the YouTube. So just look at Adam F.C. Fletcher, look up Free Child Institute. You can find all that stuff. But look at these places and spaces for young people to be engaged in democracy at school. Oh, we love that place. But wait, what's that one next to it? Social services? Young people can be meaningfully involved there. I'm not making this up, folks. Freechild.org is packed literally with 1,000 examples of young people doing all of this work. Schools, specifically at sound.org. Public spaces? This is where democracy lives. Your parks, your town hall, the public library, parks and recreation, faith-based places, businesses, culture, government, home. We're going to unpack some of that as we keep going along. But this is where democracy lives and dies. These are the places. Quick note, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, considerations as I go along, drop your comment in the chat. I'm going to keep it open here and keep looking at it. And I'm going to ask you to do a couple more things in a minute. But the point is, keep going. I wrote this book to teach this spiral. Give me a thumbs up. If you're on the Zoom, give me a thumbs up to indicate that you know anything about the ladder of children's participation. Anybody heard of that before? I know that Peter has. Nobody else? We're good. All right, cool. There was, in 1969, there was a researcher, her name was Shelley Arnstein, and she developed this ladder of citizen participation. It was pretty cool. Broke down some ideas. In the 90s, a guy named Roger Hart picked it up for UNESCO and he developed it into the ladder of children's participation. Neither of those go anywhere. They don't do anything because they didn't teach us about this. This democracy action spiral is at the heart of defeating the democracy deficit disorder. This democracy action spiral takes democratic participation and moves it up the spiral in order to show us that voice, involvement, engagement, and infusion have places, spaces, and opportunities that we need to have for every person all the time across our democracy in every institution that you can imagine right now, whether that's schools, homes, or, oh, wait a second, any of these places and spaces. The democracy action spiral is contingent on 3 different elements: empowerment, working with power in order to transform society. It's not for fun and games. It's not for a good time or to look good. It's for power. And don't doubt for a moment that it's about anything else. You're either taking it or you're giving it. There's nothing else in between. The hermit who lives on the hill might have power over themselves, but they've lost the power over the world that they were co-constructing. Oh, wait, they're still exercising it, even by living on the hill. But that democratic infusion, the one at the top of the spiral, that happens when we're most engaged. That happens when we're most democratic. And this is where young people need to be. This is what we need. These strategies are what will end the democracy deficit disorder. You want to see an end to that deficit? This is what we'll do. We'll engage young people in activist learning to teach them to learn through activism. Activism without action isn't activism. Activism without learning is worthless. It's merely action. Paulo Freire has a great quote around this, but the ultimate objective, the ultimate point is, don't act for the sake of acting. Act to learn. Youth adult partnerships. Oh, wait, we're going to get into that in a minute. Youth rights. Oh, wait, we're going to touch on that. There's so many strategies. There are so many ways to end the democracy deficit disorder. But what we know is what Bell Hooks taught us as recently as 2018 before she passed. She said that when we love children, we acknowledge by our every action that they are not property, that they have rights, and that we respect and uphold their rights. Well, what does that mean in practicality? I told you all at the top, I bumped into AERO through my seeking liberation for young people. That's it. I read the book. Oh, that's right. If you haven't read John Holt's book, Escape from Childhood, go do that right now. If you haven't read As Soon as You're Born, They Make You Feel Small, go read that right now. If you haven't listened to John Lennon, well, anyway, just another brick in the wall, right? The point is that we have to move beyond just talking about it, and we have to be about it. We have to be about acknowledging the fundamental rights of young people right now. These fundamental rights are granted by the United States Constitution. They're reinforced by the UN Declaration of the Rights of Human Rights. They're the right, freedom to join and form organizations, the freedom of expression. You can read the rest for yourself. You know what these are. We all rely on these. Oh, but one of the differences between anybody under 18 and everybody over 18 is that we don't grant them these rights. What does that mean, Adam? Well, it means that we have a dilemma where we see and treat young people just as adults in the making. Alfie Cohen called it out way back in '93. He said, children, after all, are not just adults in the making. They are people whose current needs and rights and experiences must be taken seriously. So what does that look like in practice? Well, this is what it looks like. Currently, youth have rights to stop illegal labor, stop endangerment and infanticide. They actually have legal right to stop parental actions, including youth maltreatment. In some states, and they're taking them away all the time, gender identity or sexual orientation is a right. Sexual abuse or exploitation, they have a right to stop that. The right to stop neglect or abuse, the right to stop sexual trafficking and labor trafficking, the right for people with disabilities to live as full people, the right to family migration and support for familial migration, the right to unaccompanied children in a situation of migration to stop. These are real rights that young people are granted across the United States and around the world right now. There are more, but this is kind of a basic list. But then if they have all those rights, what more do they need? I don't know. They have a right to alternative care, a right to police custody or detention, and a right to stop that, a right to stop being homeless as young people. They have a right to access their parents in prison or custody in many states. They have a right to court or other judicial proceedings that are just for them as young people. You can read the rest of the list yourself. So how do we expand that? What do we grow on? I'm not going to read all these, but I am going to tell you that back in the 2000s, I partnered closely with an organization called the National Youth Rights Association. If you're not familiar with them, go check them out. The National Youth Rights Association, youthrights.org. They've been advocating for these rights for more than 20 years now. We led an international effort to help young people around the world identify the rights that matter to them. And this is that list. This is evolved from that list. Young people want the right to have all of these different opportunities. It goes on. If you want to see more, I'm going to post this slideshow publicly when we're all done. I'll see if it can be posted on WUVA. I don't know the answer to that. Peter, if you're listening, I would love that education. But the point is, WUVA? Did we decide on this?
I don't know. I say Hoover, but I don't know if I say it right.
Yeah. Can we post a slideshow to it?
I believe we can, but if not, what I will do is I will include it in an email out to everyone.
Sweet.
And they can see it there.
Yeah. I know that this is a big frantic list, guys, and I hate doing that. But sometimes this is just what we do. Now, Robert's asking about the utility of meetings, votings, rallies, school, courts, marches, media, violence. How does the individual move self as democracy? Robert, I'm going to answer that towards the end. Let me keep gunning through this part, and I'm going to jump on that. For everybody else, if you have more questions, just drop them in here, and I'll make some space at the end for that. But let's take a look at this, and maybe some of this will begin to answer that. These are elements of youth action for democracy. These are things that young people have been doing, are doing, and continue to do, whether or not adults are seeing them and acknowledging them right now. I call these the 7 Ps, and the list fluctuates. Sometimes there's 10, sometimes there's 9, sometimes there's 5. It all depends on my mood. But the point is, young people are taking action for democracy with people right now, with the adults in their lives, with other young people in their lives, with younger people in their lives. But this is one element of democracy that young people are working on right now and with. Young people are working in places, defined spaces, such as schools, such as courts, such as meetings, and actual physical geographic spaces where they operate every day. We might not value it as adults, but they are there in their everyday mode. Whether or not we agree with their full function and what they're doing in those places in the name of democracy, or that looks like democracy, that's irrelevant because they are doing it. My job as an adult sometimes is not to scold or correct. It's not to lambast or critique. It's simply to engage with young people where they are at, rather than insisting they come to me where I want them to be. Since every young person does not have access to this space right now, I go to where they are. And sometimes that's a place. Sometimes young people are engaging in procedures in order to challenge, change, transform democracy. That's right, procedures. How boring could that be? They want to be involved in policy making. And yet, there's a brand new national organization called the National Student Board Member Association, working with student representatives on district and state boards of education across the United States in 23 states. That's just been formed. This National Student Board Member Association, they're all about the procedures. Sure, they might be brainwashed, they might be placated, they might not be full anarchists ready to overthrow the system and challenge everything right now, but they're fighting for democracy. And my job as an adult sometimes is to support young people where they're at instead of where I want them to be. That also means going to my local juvenile detention center and working directly with those young people to hear about their experiences in democracy. Now that moves away from procedure and towards practices. There are practical things that young people are doing every day to reinforce, challenge, and change and transform democracy. One of those places is the juvenile detention system. Those young people who have committed crimes or are seen as offenders, who have been labeled as juveniles or delinquents, they are just as in need of democracy as every young person who has never committed an offense in their life. And for that reason, I'm with them. I'm also with young people who are challenging adult apathy by calling for positions. I don't get it. I don't understand it. But when they want on those school boards, I'm going to fight to join them. When they want the right to vote, like they're fighting for in Massachusetts right now, there's legislation in the Massachusetts state legislature to lower the voting age to 16. Those young people want voting opportunities and positions as voters. Similarly, young people who pull out their spray can and put their message on the wall of the city hall that says, F the police, they want positions too, as activists and upsetters and disruptors. And they are fighting for democracy, and I'm with them. You get what this looks like because you see it all the time. That quiet young lady at the back of the class, she is practicing democracy by not sharing her voice. Her apathy might be conditioned or it might be chosen as a statement. My job is to support her. It goes on from there, but especially extends to possibilities. And the possibilities that young people hold in their hearts for our democracy. My daughter, man, it was 20 years ago now when that baby was brought to the world. And yeah, I had so many people critique me. Why would you bring a child into this world? Look at the chaos, look at the mayhem, look at the pain, look at the suffering. And I know some of that, not all of it. I'm just a white guy. I have my barriers, I have my boundaries, I have my blind spots and my dark side and all that. But I also knew that my daughter would have a new vision for democracy, a new vision for the world. And my job isn't to critique that. Sometimes it's to be with her possibilities. That's what it's all about. That and age equity. I mean, you know, you want to do something, you want to make a difference. Well, this is what equity looks like. Equity is understanding the knowledge, opinions, skills, actions, and wisdom of young people is just as valid as adults. It has place, space, and opportunity to inform all of our relationships with young people. When you seek this kind of work, Peter introduced me as a youth ally. I don't know. I need young people to tell me that I'm an ally. I can't name myself that personally. I appreciate you seeing me that way, Peter. But I do seek to be a partner. I do seek equity with young people. These partnerships between youth and adults, they are conscious. They're not coincidental. They are equitable. They are not equal. So the consciousness versus the coincidence, you know that. You get that innately. We do it on purpose. This doesn't just happen. The equity, not equality, that might not make so much sense, especially since we've been calling for racial equality for how long? But wait a second. How can we have equality when one group starts with their feet planted firmly in concrete while the other one's wearing angel wings on its shoes and ready to fly? Adults are given power, potential, and possibilities all the time, while young people are demanded to sit down, be quiet, listen, and do what you're told. We want equity that places them on equal footing, but does so with respect to their knowledge, their opinion, their belief, their understanding, their goals, their aspirations. We need to practice humility in our partnerships with young people. Because for all of our best intentions, we don't know it all. We haven't seen it all. I'm afflicted by my whiteness. I don't know about you, but I am. It's a challenge for me to be this guy because my ego gets in the way constantly. This world that's made up for me, the one where I have access to all of the government services, where I don't get pulled over for being white. Not to mention my identity as a heterosexual male, not to mention my college degrees, not to mention my house, my car, yada, yada, yakety yak. It's very big. I have a lot of opportunity to flex this ego. And my job is to learn to be humble if I want to work with young people in partnerships. If you can't identify yourself in that humility when working with young people, you're not in partnership with young people. We are appropriately transparent in youth adult partnerships. We don't overshare, but we don't undershare either, because for too long, adults have held the curtain shut. We need to learn to be like Toto. Run up and pull the curtains back and show that big head. Just a little person behind the controls, trying to make it speak. And then constantly and consistently, we must be flexible. It's hard. Oh, I mentioned earlier, adult development. Adult development, one of the things that happens to us as we get older is that we get more rigid in our thinking. We adopt and adapt to the present and to the past more effectively than we do to the future. Youth adult partnerships insist that we be flexible and that we embrace the future. My guy Bono, who's getting pretty old these days, he said the future needs a big kiss. That is consistent flexibility. And it's hard because I still haven't updated my phone to the latest update. Shoot, stick it to the man. It begins at home. So we've talked about the school. We've talked about communities. We've mentioned governance. But all of this democracy deficit disorder fighting starts at home. It starts in these simple ways. Learning might be the biggest one. I made this graphic. Back during the pandemic because I was grappling with this idea of how the heck does youth voice stay alive? Youth voice, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. But I'll tell you this, if you think of youth voice already, you might be thinking of it the wrong way. Youth voice is not a synonym for youth leadership. Youth voice is not a synonym for youth action, for youth engagement, for youth motivation, for youth anything aside from the expression of every single young person anywhere at any time in any way they want to for whatever reason they want to. Youth voice ain't nothing to do with you as an adult. Oh, you happen to listen to it? Oh, you're interested in it? That's awesome. Here's a bunch of youth voice at home. By the way, this is where democracy starts. It starts in learning. It starts in creativity at home. It starts in feedback at home. If we want to defeat the democracy deficit disorder, we need to engage young people in decision-making at home. We need to build their mindsets, work with their health, help them communicate, look at their consumption, look at their recreation, look at their energy, engage them in problem solving. This is where the democracy deficit disorder is defeated. And when we don't do this work at home with our own young people, it might be your grandchildren, it might be your nieces and nephews, it might be your neighbor's kids, it might be your own children, it might be somebody that you adopted. I don't care. This is where we save democracy. Now, what does it all amount to? What does it all cause? Where does it all happen? It happens through democratic praxis. If you're familiar with the work of Paulo Freire and Henry Giroux and Peter McLaren and Shirley Steinberg and Bell Hooks and any of these critical pedagogues, these people who come from a more socialist leaning in their learning. If you're a person who is familiar with Miles Horton or A.S. Neal or John Holt or even I'm sorry, Peter Berg has written a really good book. I don't know if you all are familiar with it, but if you're familiar with any of these, you know that we need to do more with young people than just arrive. We need to do more than show up. When we get to the end of youth adult partnerships, when we come to the other side of youth voice, when we engage young people in all of these ways, meaningful student involvement, holistic youth development, when we defeat the democracy deficit disorder, we begin to experience democratic praxis. Praxis should exist throughout the entire process from the beginning to the end. It's where we theorize, what is happening. We critique it, examine it, look at it, take it apart, and then we put it back together and gain our authority. Some people call this self-empowerment. I think it's about learning to write our own story, to learn to author our own story. We take action, we do something. Praxis cannot happen in a bubble, in a vacuum. It must happen with the people in the field doing things. And then we must reflect on it and theorize again. Praxis is not a one-way line. It's not a stair step, a ladder. It doesn't climb. Praxis goes around again and again. And it is what defeats the democracy deficit disorder. My name is Adam Fletcher, and this is how I'm learning democracy with young people. Today, I've talked about a lot of things. I've talked about engaging young people in social change. I've talked about meaningful student involvement and holistic youth development. We've looked at some of the things that are challenging young people, whether it's adultism or the youth industrial complex. We've taken apart the home, the structures that young people are in, the cultures that we live through, our own personal attitudes a little bit. And y'all, this is just touching the surface. In this new book, I cover it all. Go and pre-order yours right now at Amazon. Please send me any comments, concerns, questions, ideas. And we have a few minutes to do a little Q&A. Please, I invite you, unmute yourself, share your question out loud. Otherwise, I'll wrap it up in a minute. Anybody? Drop it in the chat, say it out loud, whatever you want. Questions, comments, concerns, ideas, considerations.
We could also use the raise your hand function if you want to do it that way. And this way, we can just take some questions. So anybody who has a question, use the raise your hand. If you don't know, if it's not showing up on your screen, go to the reactions, and then you'll see it'll actually look like it'll say raise hand. And you can just do that, and then you can ask your question. Just one sec here as I pull that up. Well, actually, I'm going to jump in with a quick question while people are finding the raise your hand function. So you talked a lot about, this process really, and how it gets a little messy sometimes. And the fact that you are going through this process with youth. And I love what you said at the end, like you're learning along with them, right? You are actually in this process with them. And as you're going through the process, you're learning so much about, what it means to do this. So I guess my question really is, what has been the biggest challenge for you so far?
That's a great question, Peter. I'm going to go out on a limb here, guys, and I'm just going to speak to y'all personally. The greatest challenge for me in this work is sustainability. I am 20 some years in, and it's hard to keep doing it because the career that I've chosen in order to enable me to do it, it's not consistent. It doesn't work well. And I ain't a businessman. I rue the business of this, but I don't have a different way to do it. So it's what I do. But it is the hardest thing about it, is just sustaining and keeping going after all this time and in this form. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Robert, go ahead when you're ready.
Empowering the individual. I think you were saying that it's so important that the family, the parents, support the child to realize themselves and begin expressing themselves empowered as knowing what is democracy. Beyond that and reaching from self out into the community, I'm still a little bit lost.
Cool. It's actually multifold, Robert. It's the home and the parent. It's the school and the teacher. It's the community and the community worker, the neighbor. It's all of these different places and spaces. And that's why that list of spaces, because this democracy work isn't contingent on one thing. It operates in all of them.
Awesome. Thanks. We'll see you in the morning.
So we get to see all of them.
It's nice to have the option to do it online too, right?
And it's good to mute yourself, Peter.
I
Anyhow.
hear you.
Hey, Peter, can you mute yourself? Oh, there you go. There you go. All right. So anyway, Robert, it happens everywhere simultaneously. So all that stuff that you picked up from home, now apply that to school. Now apply it to government. Now apply it across the spectrum. And we can all have a function no matter what our role in interaction with young people is. Just that home is the richest environment and maybe the first environment where young people have the potential of experiencing democracy and learning about it. It's a good question. I'm going to let Peter. Oh, Peter, we want to call?
No, I'm good. So Rachel, go ahead when you're ready.
Oh, you're muted, Rachel. You're muted. There you go.
I think the most difficult thing is other people. I was a public school teacher and I wrestled with the powers that be my entire career.
Yep. Yeah, there is a great quote out there in the world, and I can't remember it off the top of my head. It's something to the effect of, the only thing that gets in the way of democracy are the people that are in it. And we're all and honestly, Rachel, I'm part of the problem. I am not the saint of democracy. And you're part of the problem, and he's part of the problem, and she's part of the problem, and they're part of the problem. We're all part of the problem, as well as being part of that solution. And for all the trouble that you might have experienced as a public school teacher, you also were part of the solution. Even by just having an attitude of democracy, that does more than doing nothing at all. So we get an opportunity to be the problem and the solution in this wonderful situation.
Yes, it just doesn't extend past my classroom and my own kids.
Absolutely. And none of us are going to fix the whole thing. It's a great question. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Rachel. So Samantha, and then Deb is after Samantha.
Hi, I'm curious as to what examples you found of youth participating in some of these spaces that kind of surprised you. Like, for example, I had no idea that there were actual student board members, on making like educational decisions. So I'm like curious as to if you have other specific examples where youth are participating in these spaces in ways that kind of surprised you.
Samantha, I'm really, really intrigued by systemic decision making, if only because it is so much more widespread than we know, and such an underreported phenomenon. There is a movement around youth involvement in philanthropy, where they are talking about young people not just benefiting from people giving money, but actually young people finding that money, writing grants and obtaining it, and then distributing it to other young people or youth serving organizations to help them forward their mission. But beyond that, also in the environmental space, also in the social services space, and on and on. So young people being engaged in philanthropy absolutely blows my mind, especially when these foundations that are engaging them are deliberately reaching out to poor youth and youth of color to create these kind of transformative opportunities for them to experience what this means. That's intriguing to me. I'm not saying that I 100% agree with it, but it's one of those things. It's like, wow, that's for reals. On the freechild.org website, I have more than 1,000 examples of young people doing this stuff. So if you want to see more specific things, I also have a guide to student board membership that's on soundout.org that has more than 50 districts listed that actually involve students in district level decision making on school boards every single week, month, year, and have been for a while. So
Wait, sorry, the guide for the student board membership, where do I find that?
Soundout.org.
Soundout.org.
Yep. All right, who's next?
Deb, when you're ready, go ahead.
Sure. I love everything you talk about, and especially your absolute conviction that youth can and should operate at all levels as full participants. I've been part of youth-run organizations since I was 12. When I joined, I was a science nerd, and I am a science nerd. I joined an aquarium and terrarium club for youth, and we did everything. And these amazing guys taught us Robert's Rules of Order. They took us on ecological rescues. They helped us cure our fish of ick. And they appointed the youngest person, 8-year-old Manuel, to be our sergeant at arms. So that was my first experience of self-governance, and it's really helped me in all the organizations since. And I wonder, I'm just one, and the Homer, are you aware of Homer Lane's work, which inspired A.S. Neill, who created Summerhill?
No, I saw your note. I would love to know more about that.
Yeah, just briefly, he was one of A.S. Neill's psychoanalysts, because it was the psychoanalytic movement got, it's went down a few wrong roads, but it also really recognized the importance of childhood and the impact of childhood experience. So Lane, I think Neil met him as an analyst, or maybe he was aware of Lane's work with what they called juvenile delinquents at the time, and they were, what we call street youth now, highly oppressed kids, abandoned kids who were doing crimes in order to survive. And in Lane's institutions, the kids governed themselves, and that's what taught youth self-government to A.S. Neill. And
Very cool.
so it's out there.
I'll look that up. Thanks so much, Deb.
All right, we could probably sneak in one more question here before we have to say goodbye to Adam for today. So let's see. All right. All right, looks like there aren't any more questions at this point. So Adam, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you so much again for doing this and sharing your work with us here at AERO and in all the other places that you do. Hopefully we can get you to come to an in-person AERO conference, one year, and hopefully next year we're a little closer to where you are. So you'll be able to make it out. So again, I really so much appreciate your time and your thoughts and all the work that you're doing out there. And, always keep AERO in mind. If there's anything you want us to share about the work that you're doing, get it over to me. We'll get it out in our newsletter, and, we'll make sure you get the attention that you deserve.
Very cool.
All right.
Thank you so much, Peter. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks so much. For everyone else, I'm gonna stop recording, and you're free to hang out in the room and chat and network.